This podcast discusses violence and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised. Mona is a very small woman with shoulder-length brown hair and a beautiful smile. Her eyes are lively, but show a deep sadness behind them. From Louisville, Kentucky, this is Ashley Christensen bringing you Catharsis, Crime Victims Speak.
My name's Mona Mills. I am 54 years old. Birthday next month. The mother of three and a crusader for rights for victims because of my own personal experience of my own sister being murdered many years ago, 1981. And it probably took me about 15 years after that until I could start reaching out to others. I had a very hard time dealing with Barbel's murder and then losing my mother very shortly afterwards. So I wasn't much good to anyone at that point. Basically, I had to spend some time with my children and keep my head together. I had a lot of responsibilities by the age of 25.
So tell me about Barbel's name.
Barbel is German. She was born in Germany. My mother's German. There's not another name for it. It's just a German name. But her middle name's Crystal. She was born in Bad Kreuznach, Germany in 1960. And they left to come to the United States in 1962. And Dad was in the service. That's how Mom and Dad met. Okay. Little whirlwind romance. Surprise baby. My mother, she was from Germany, but a very proud U.S. citizen.
So once they got here, how was life?
Now, when she first arrived, I would say she was met with a bit of prejudice because my father, he came from, I call it up in the hills in Tennessee. So she wasn't real openly accepted.
Is that where they settled? Is that where they found a home, was in Tennessee?
Only for a short while. My father was still in, the service in the Army, and they ended up here in Kentucky.
Okay.
With Dad at Fort Knox at one point.
I asked Mona to describe Barbel, their relationship, and what type of person she was.
Barbel, she was just such a happy child, and she could make friends very easily. I'm the middle one, so kind of...
Yeah, I know all about middle child syndrome.
I started Jan from the Brady Bunch.
Mona and Barbel also had a younger sister named Sharon, just a couple years younger than Mona. But according to her, Barbel was special.
She was the pretty one, the one that always got to do the good things first, the typical little sister tagging along at first through the early years. Then as I hit teens, it changed a little bit. I'd always have my little proud moment when she asked me, I think I was 16, which made her 19, and asked me out on a double date. And I was like, I've come into my own.
You've made it with her.
I have made it. And it was a lot of fun.
So you all were close.
We were.
Sounds like it.
And we were getting closer at that time. At this point, it's later on in life, Mom had divorced, and we live in a very small apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment. And me and Sharon share a room, and Mom, Barbel, and Stephanie are in a room. It was a little cramped, but we just didn't complain. We were all females, and we just all looked out for each other. Mm-hmm. I called us the Brat Pack. Stephanie was born February 25th, 1980. So Barbel did get to spend a Thanksgiving and a Christmas and the first Mother's Day, just sadly not her first birthday. Barbel was murdered on January 7th, 1981.
Do you remember the last time you talked to her before that?
That morning, I had slept in. I remember that day, moment to moment. And she's like, get up. So I get up, and of course, I always smell coffee, which I love the smell of it, but I sure hadn't acquired a taste for it yet. And Babel's in there feeding Stephanie, and they're hustling around. Mom's getting ready to go to work. But Mom had a real fear of snow and ice, and there was a very, very light snow falling. And we had always worked it out to where Babel would get a ride to work, and someone would pick her up. She had never driven. But that day we changed things because Mom was worried about her having to wait for a ride in the cold. And she was worried about driving. So everything got switched around a little bit. Mom had called a friend and said, can I get a ride with you? And Babel was going to take the car for the first time. Babel left first about 1:45 in the afternoon, and Mom left maybe 30 minutes later, and me, Stephanie, and Sharon were staying in. It was cold out.
So where did she work?
She worked at the Cheker Oil gas station on Cane Run Road. It was, a lot of people think, you walk in. It wasn't set up like that. There was a window you could walk up to, and that is how you paid for your gasoline or bought your cigarettes. Very small office inside. So, cigarettes, lighters, things like that. She only would go outside at the end of the shift to read the gas pumps. Of course, that was before cell phones. And there was an outside payphone, but even inside the office, from my understanding, it was a payphone.
That's interesting.
No alarm systems. Maybe some businesses around there had some at that point, because there had been a rash of robberies in the weeks prior from the same people. We'd always ask her, do you feel safe? And she said, yeah, I feel safe. Nobody can come in.
When did you find out what had happened to her?
Well, we were very consistent on how we kept in touch with one another. Mm-hmm. Nobody went anywhere without telling the other. And I knew exactly what time she should be home. 8:15, she should be pulling in. By 8:20, I was starting to call the gas station. I had the number. That haunts me, because I hate the thought that she heard the phone ringing. So I had called several times, and by probably, like I said, we were very tight-knit. So by 8:45, I'm calling my mother at work. And Mom's telling me, don't worry. She's maybe went with Eddie, Stephanie's father. She said, do you have his number? I said, yeah, it's in there. I'll get it. I'll call him. And then it took me probably 30 minutes to an hour to finally get a hold of him. And I wasn't convinced that I believed him when he said, no, she's not here. So I kept thinking, they're pulling one on me. But by 9:30, I called my mother back, and she would try very hard not to let any fear be heard in her voice, but I could hear it. And she normally didn't get off work till 10:45, and said she was going to ask to leave early because her route would take her directly past the gas station. And so she had, of course, the security guard that she had rode in with, had to see if he could get off, and they worked that out, and they arrived at the gas station approximately 11 p.m.
Okay.
I had asked her, should I ride up there? I was trying to get a friend, and she did not want me going there. I kind of wish I would have, but then my mother's always told me she would have lost 2 daughters then that night. She knew from half a block away, she could see the pump lights on and the interior lights of the gas station out, which were the opposite of what should be. Her car was not there, but before Jesse, that was his name, who she was riding with, even got the car stopped, she was out of it, running towards the door, but he was right in pursuit. And she flung the door open, which was not locked, and just saw everything upside down on the floors. But, cash register drawer was laying on the floor. Everything was knocked off. There was cigarettes. Things were every disarray. And he dragged her back out and called the police. And sadly, the first police officer to arrive, because I remember this, my mother telling me, because it made her so angry and hurt. She heard him over his radio saying possibly an abduction, but we have a very young clerk who's possibly run off with the money. Which mother wanted to claw his eyes out.
I can only imagine.
Because she knew her daughter. And her daughter had a baby waiting at home. Mom called us from the gas station finally. And once again, she was very protective. So she's trying to, my younger sister was 13. And she asked us to just pray that evidently something was wrong here at the gas station. Because the whole time, me and Sharon, we were praying that she hadn't had an accident. That was the only thing that had ever crossed our mind. We never went that other direction. It was so cold. And she was so, I can drive on the ice, Mom. I'll be fine.
So independent.
Very independent. Very independent young woman. She just signed up for spring classes at JCC. She was, turning things around. She realized, I'm not going to work at a gas station all my life. But she kind of felt guilty, Mom paying for everything, and said, I'm going to bring a little money in until, I have a decent job. About approximately, now I've got Stephanie in bed for hours now. She's such a good little girl. About 1:30 a.m., you could hear a car pull up. It was a dark sedan I did not recognize, and I seen my mother, when the light came on, get out of the passenger side, and a man with a hat on, a little cap. So I'm nervous, thinking, oh gosh, they found her, thank you, Lord. I'm still hoping and praying. And he introduced himself. He was the police chaplain, and asked me and my younger sister to sit down. And my younger sister is a very wild little girl then, and even now. Sorry, Sharon. But, and he tried to tell us, but Sharon wasn't going to allow him. And it always bothered me, because the first thing he said was, your sister's been raped. And then we stopped him and would not let him go on until he finally said, and murdered. And then it was just the most chaotic meltdown mess ever. Sharon was screaming. I guess we all were. Mother had, at that point, let him do it. She couldn't even look at us for a minute. And then she did. It was hard. They had found her. They had put a thing out on the police radios, of course, a bolo, checking for the car. It was a helicopter. I could hear a helicopter flying. The helicopter spotted the car, probably less than 3 blocks from where my mother stood at the gas station, because she would not leave. She would not get in a warm car. She would nothing till she knew where her daughter was. And the police helicopter spotted the car, and the first arriving officer knew from the description he was given it was the car, and of course Barbel was in the back seat, dead. The next morning, it was just I'm going to have to say, just a huge shock to the whole community. They did not release her name immediately, but a lot of people knew immediately. And the next 2 days was just such a people in and out and in and out, and people leaving little notes on our door. And it was just kind of shocking, just prayers, lots of prayers, which was very nice. People really reached out in the community to us, which was amazing, and helped.
It did help.
It did help. And, there's so many people I never thanked. I think back to the days where I forced myself to eat a bowl of vegetable soup that I don't even know who brought over, because I never thanked them. And things like that. That in the days to follow, my father being an army man, it was extremely hard on him. He served time in Vietnam, and he fought for our country, and he was extremely in a state of depression. but he couldn't save his daughter. So he would be at the gas station the first 2 days continuously. Have you found who did this to my daughter? And I believe it broke on day 5 or 6, the first arrest. And how it came about was the Cheker Oil gas station posted a $1,500 reward. And someone turned a name in, one of the names in, because he had bought stolen cigarettes from him.
That were stolen during
from the gas
crime.
station. After the crime. They went back to the gas station after they murdered her. One did, Kevin Stanford. He lived in the apartment building right next door to the gas station.
So he was familiar with kind of the comings and goings of people there.
He knew when she would come out to read those pump numbers. But it was on, I believe, day 5 or 6, they had arrested Calvin Buchanan. He was not, that I know of, involved with the murder whatsoever, but they had arrested him. He was a 30-something-year-old man who had been involved in a gang rape some years before. And he agreed to go on the phone and be recorded as he talked to his nephew, David Buchanan. And on the phone, David Buchanan said, "Everything's all right, nobody knows we did it." So he implicated himself and implicated the other 2 that were involved. And this is how they came up on the 3 names of the actual killers.
How did you learn of the arrests?
Calvin Buchanan's arrest in the newspaper.
So you didn't get any kind of phone call?
No. I say, it's so sad to say, that was 1981. This is 2018. It's not a whole lot different. And I'm living proof of that right now. But no, most of the things we were hearing was from a reporter. We were very weary of reporters. Nobody wants to get on TV and cry. They'd already shown pictures of Barbel in the car, showing her bare legs, which we didn't appreciate, which just destroyed my little sister and my mother. And, so there was things going on. We didn't know who to talk to. There was no victim's advocate or anything like that going on. We had each other. My mother had a very great faith in that she went to her God.
Mm-hmm. So then as the days kind of unfolded, there was the first arrest. And you learned about that through the news.
Learned about that through the news. Learned about all 3 of the arrests through the newspaper, I would say. That is how we learned who was being arrested. And then they were being very low-key because of their ages. We did know how old they were, but we couldn't understand what's there to be low-key about. They've committed adult crimes. It was, you get tired of hearing the child. A child doesn't commit those type of crimes. I mean, Mom was trying to be Mom. Mm-hmm. So she told us that Barbel had been unconscious, that they had knocked her out, and that things had happened after that. But even though I was 17, I call me naive, which I really wasn't, but I did not even know what the word sodomy meant. I had no clue. So that wasn't until 5 years later, after my mother passed away, that I got all the reports in and actually found out the truth of everything. So it was like being hit really hard in the stomach.
Did it change your parents' relationship or their personalities after they found out?
Yes, it changed everything. I can even remember the day after, that morning. My mother had called her father in Germany, and she was speaking in German and crying. And my father was at the table, and I just remember sitting on the couch and looking at them and thinking, in 12 hours I'm looking at my mother and father who looked 10 years older. it was the saddest thing to see. I had never seen my father cry. His face was so swollen. In those next 5 years, they were tried. Two were tried as adults. The third was tried as a juvenile in exchange for his testimony. He was plea bargained, I guess is what you would call it today. But he had not gotten out of the car. He did not participate in the sexual attacks upon her. But he supplied the gun. So I hold him just as guilty. They were found guilty after approximately 6-day trial, 5-6-day trial.
Were they all tried together?
Buchanan and Stanford were tried together. They both would come into the courtroom every single day. Stanford would always stop at the table to take a moment to stop and smile at my mother. That was his thing every day. And the other one would basically go to sleep at the table during the whole trial. But they were easily, with all of the evidence and testimony, there was more than one witness. There were several witnesses. They were easily found guilty, and David Buchanan was sentenced to life plus 60, and Kevin Stanford to death.
I asked Mona about the trial process and if there was anyone who was particularly helpful.
At this point now we had Ernie Jasmine was the prosecutor. Ernie was very helpful and would confer with my mother and father whenever it needed to be. If they had a question for him, I will say he was there for them, especially back in them days. But we were going through a lot of problems in the courtroom itself. A lot of people don't realize this, but they had decided to change courtrooms because they didn't want them paraded down the hall, afraid for their lives. But then we were being threatened, and we had no clue why somebody wanted to threaten us. So even though you go through detectors upon entering, they had set up additional ones before entering the courtroom, so that we would all have to be scanned before we would be allowed to enter. I was very nerve-wracking. Sharon, my younger sister, she was especially scared. So deputies usually would meet us at the car and walk us in and walk us out.
It was then that Mona told me about something that had happened in the courthouse, and it floored me.
A lot of odd things will happen when you're in the middle of a high-profile murder trial, which back then it was. And I was standing with my father, and I'll never forget this, and this is the absolute truth, but we were downstairs maybe getting a drink or a snack, and a man approached us that we had never seen before, and he told my father, he said, I can get this ended by the end of today. I can take care of him for a price. And my father looked very nervous, and he was like, no, I'm putting my faith in the justice system.
Time and life have an uncanny way of moving on, even when we're in the midst of grief.
In 1987, Mom died of a brain tumor. She was 50, very healthy, very beautiful lady, I think. So that was very hard. Then I had a 2-year-old son, and then of course now I have Stephanie full-time, who's 7 at this point. So I'm getting my hands full. But making it. Then my father moved to Tennessee after my mother passed away. So then all contact was going to be made to me when it came to my sister's case at this point. I remember I got a letter. Well, it was postmarked to Dad, and I called him and said, want me to open it? It's from Ernie Jasmine. And he said, yes, open it up. Now, it seemed like David Buchanan had already went before the parole board. We maybe are into the 6th or 7th year at this point. I'm going to guess 7 with his life plus 60 sentence. At the time, I think 7 years is when you went up for your first parole hearing. So we weren't, there was no notification or anything like that, hey, he's going up. Didn't know we were even allowed to go and talk. So that was the first thing. And then I started reaching out after that to the Attorney General's office. I wanted more information. And I was starting to regain my voice back a little bit and not be as scared to ask. And actually, I wanted copies of everything. And started to get very demanding until I got it.
Why had you been scared before that?
I don't know if it was the authority figure, and I didn't feel like I was supposed to question how they were doing something. So it took me a few years to grow up some and to realize, wait a minute, I do deserve answers. What's the worst they can do? Tell me no, they're not going to answer me. So it was probably 1988. And then in 1989, I accompanied my father to the United States Supreme Court, where Kevin Stanford had filed and had been told they would listen on the Eighth Amendment. Was it cruel and unusual to execute a then 17-year-old?
So that's the issue that went up to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And how was that experience going? I mean, that's a big deal.
It is a very big deal. Nervous wreck. I remember me and my father was so nervous. I had to stay calm for him. And, I had to give him our little pep talk. We're just as good as anybody in this room. Walking with our heads held high. But I won't lie, I felt like a country girl from Kentucky had just walked into a room full of Yale grads. But I did, held my head up high, sat right there in the front row, and I listened. And I tried so hard making eye contact with the different judges, because I thought, please see me. Just see me. I want them to see through my eyes what I'm experiencing, which I know is ridiculous, but that's how I felt. The United States Supreme Court upheld the death penalty for 16 and 17-year-olds in 1989. There would be no changes on that until 2005.
This case made history, and when history comes into play, that means the books will report it.
However way it ruled, they wanted it going into the school books and so forth and so on, at college students and so forth. When all three of my children, when they entered high school, with the exception of all three, that case became a class project on for or against the death penalty. For Stephanie, it was horrible. I told her, you don't have to do this. She says, no, I'm going to do it. And then again, my older son, when he entered college, there it was again. But after that, it's a lot of ups and downs through the years because nothing ever stops. There's always going to be an appeal.
I asked Mona how she was treated in the system as the case moved through.
I would have to say I was treated no way. It was almost as if I wasn't there. So nobody treated me badly, but nobody went out of their way to really talk to me either.
And how was that?
It's a very odd feeling. I mean, you want to be informed. I mean, I'm not stupid, but at the same time, half of this, the legal jargon, I cannot understand. And I needed someone to sit down and explain it to me. Maybe sometimes twice. But then, I got it. So that would be very frustrating. And it would be frustrating for my father. Because we would get home and he would tell me, I don't understand. And I would do what I could to find out exactly what happened. And then share it with my father,
Paul Patton was the governor in office at that time, and toward the end of his term, he was dealing with numerous scandals, issues that the press found irresistible.
So he was kind of being cornered by reporters, and somebody threw out Kevin Stanford's name. Are you going to do anything about the Kevin Stanford case? I believe he saw that as his out from the other questions and said, yes, I plan to correct an injustice that has been done.
Governor Patton issued Kevin Stanford a pardon, taking him off death row and instead giving him a life sentence. I asked Mona how she found out.
A reporter called me. And she had everything mixed up. I don't have any brothers. But she had called me and said, "Did you hear your brother's been taken off of death row?" And I just slammed the phone down. And then another reporter called me, and she had the names correct. And I thought, surely not. Surely not.
And so then after that, you had requested the meeting with Patton
Yes.
multiple times.
Yes. Just to basically, I wanted to go over the case with him because he kept bringing up his age. I needed for him to know what my sister had went through. And I went in as prepared as I could possibly be, bringing along the original prosecutor, Ernie Jasmine. And Mr. Patton was quite cold. And I will keep it honest and say I had called him a pervert on TV the day before about his alleged threesomes. And of course, I had just heard that he had made that statement that he was going to change the sentence. So I did call him a pervert who hopefully would get Kevin Stanford to move in next door to him. He called me. He said, "And you're what, the aunt? The aunt of Barbel Poore?" And the sister. He knew who I was. We'd already exchanged several emails. But sitting in his office was awful. The coldest feeling in the world. This is the most important meeting of my life. I have 30 minutes, and that is it. And the man wanted to try to dominate the conversation, and not about my sister or her killer. He wanted to talk about his wife's father being murdered and being ambushed, and saying that was first-degree murder. They put me behind a little podium at this point, and I had a little envelope in front of me, and I'm like, "Are you telling me my sister's murder wasn't a first-degree murder in your opinion?" And then I went on to try to talk and explain some more things to him, and he kept glancing at his watch, which started to make me infuriated. So I knew in my little envelope, which was kind of big, was a blown-up picture of my sister. And I'm standing there, and I seen him look at that watch again, and I knew I was running out of time. So I just came out from behind my little podium, picked it up, and I slammed it as hard as I could right there into front of his face. I said, "Please, look at the person we're talking about." I said, "You're looking at your watch. You're talking about your wife's father. God bless his soul. This is about my sister, and you releasing her killer." At that point, I think I angered him, because I was speaking up. I wasn't saying anything disrespectful whatsoever. I felt like I was being disrespected. And I knew at that point nothing I was going to say was going to change anything.
In the meantime, the governor had received a package from Babel's convicted killer.
Kevin Stanford sent him at the time, a VHS tape, which I did see it through a different source. I was able to watch that. And I found it quite appalling that they used Motherless Child song in the background.
So it was a video that he had prepared to, plead for?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a video of different people speaking. I counted the seconds that they talked about my sister. 8 seconds. And the rest of the video was about poor Kevin and all he had endured. And at the very end, you could tell he was trying very hard to work up a tear, but was having a really hard time doing it. Even then, he did not take responsibility.
And it's clear that stays with you. All of these
Yes.
it's almost like little snippets and little bits and pieces have stuck.
They have, and then it's so odd. Throughout the years, I would find things out. I mean, there would maybe be a 5-year period. There are things that people don't know. My sister was allowed a last cigarette before she was executed. David Buchanan said when he walked up to the car, she was smoking a cigarette, but they were taking her to this spot to have more sex with her, as they put it. So her pants and underwear were down around her ankles. And she was on the floorboard of the car with a cigarette. when he walked up. I also found out later on that Kevin Stanford posed her body. He pulled her buttocks up as high as he could get them into the air. According to a retired police officer, I have his clipping somewhere, there was a final sex act done, and she was left in what Stanford would have referred to as a mooning position, so that the first officer arriving could be mooned. So that was quite a shock.
That's a big piece of information. What does that do to you as you find out more and more as years go on?
It just takes you back to day one. I mean, not forever, but it can sink you into a depression for weeks. And when you're now a mother of 3 children, and you're trying to keep your head above water, and you find something like this out, that's very hard. And there was a lot of days, you know, I'm not going to say I was a bad mother, because I managed the best I could. But there would be days, my kids are going to stay home today. Because moms can't drive them. I just started suffering a lot of anxiety and maybe panic attacks. Things are going to come out of you in some way or another if you don't deal with them.
If you were to look at the system as a whole, what worked and what didn't work in Barbel's case?
That's such a great question. There was a lot of little issues before this went to trial. At one point, it was almost being thrown out, parts of it, because of technicalities. So there was a lot of being very careful. The judge himself, I may not have liked him at the time for telling me not to react or show emotion, because those are the type of things that's the first thing they tell us. Don't cry in my courtroom. You need to leave it. And that's very hard. but he was a fair judge. From all accounts, I feel like he took it. I just feel like the system itself was working in the beginning, from the arrest to going to trial, sitting a jury. A jury took its time. There was no quick decisions. After that, everything went different. Once they're sentenced, you naively think, this is what they got, this is what's going to happen. And then you learn about the world of appeals. And that's where everything changes.
How many years have the appeals and the different processes been going on?
Over 30 years. The first, he's been appealing since he was sentenced in 1982. This is 2018. I think Barbel will have been murdered 38 years on January 7th. So we can say almost 37 years since he was convicted.
How has that impacted your life and other people in your family's lives?
It's impacted my life a lot. Unfortunately, when you have this on your mind, or when you're having to try to deal with it, and you have young children, you have to make choices. And I had to miss out on a lot of things that my children did because I had to make the choice to go to this court hearing. Because for me, I felt it was very important that always there was a family member for Barbel there. And I still feel that way today, and I don't think I'd got this far if I would not have continued to do so. And my kids had to grow up with that. They grew up knowing a little more than children should know. And so that's been tough. When, I look back on it today, maybe I could have missed one or two instead of missing that tournament or that little dance. But at the time, I had to just make the decision I thought was the right one. I think I lived in a lot of fear for a long time. It's real easy to get caught up in that when something like this happens to your family and you never see it coming. So there was a lot of fear of men in particular. And my mother sat me down before she had died and had a long talk with me about that. Not to focus like I am, trying to get me out of that tunnel vision. But I can't say I'm 54 years old now. I'll still check my house out when I come home. There's such a shock because you don't believe it. We didn't even believe it walking into the funeral home because it didn't look like her. Because she always had her hair so pretty. And so, there's that disbelief. And then there's that fear, Sharon especially, being younger, they're going to come for us. A 12-year-old's going to think like that. And then Kevin Stanford had escaped at one point. He had threw a chair through when they had moved him to the juvenile center. And he threw a chair through a glass window and managed to escape. So for 2 days, we did sit in fear. We sat up around the clock with a loaded pistol. Someone sat up just in case he was coming to our door. We did not know. We did not know what was going on.
How did you find out that he had escaped?
A detective did call my mother, and we were informed to be aware. Because we all lived within a 2-mile radius of each other. There was nobody in some affluent area and somebody in a poor area like has maybe been discussed in the past. No, we all lived. We weren't neighbors. We did not know each other, but we all were in the same area.
You mean you and the defendants' families?
I went and verified this information, and sure enough, in December of 1981, just 11 months after Barbel was murdered, Kevin Stanford was charged and convicted of escape in the second degree.
After the trial was over, like I said, everything changed. There's not much concern for now whoever's left to deal with this.
What advice do you have for somebody else in the community that is going through something like this?
My advice would be, first off, don't try to do it by yourself. Surround yourself with the best friends that you have. Find who has the type of time that they can give to you. I did a lot of this by myself. And it can rattle you. Get you a network of friends, but definitely allow your own time. Allow yourself to walk away. For yourself, and for your children if you have any, and for your husband, for whomever, because this is going to affect every part of your life.
And I think what I hear you saying too, if I can kind of read into it, is don't feel guilty if you have to step away.
Right, absolutely. Don't feel guilty because your loved one, it took me 30 plus years to finally realize. My sister is probably saying, what are you doing? Don't go to court. It's easy for me to say that, and it's very hard for a person to do that. For some reason, we have a lot of guilt. For me, it was, Barbel had a daughter. Why didn't this happen to me? I was childless instead of her who had a little girl to take care of, a baby. But you just can't live like that.
Okay, big question. What changes would you like to see happen in the justice system?
We have got to cut down the time on the appeals. Number one. That's not number one, but that's up there. This appealing, whether it be for a new sentence or to get off of death row or whatever it be, there has got to be some type of time limitation on this. The death penalty itself, I think it's been in some type of hold for 8 years. Get it back. Bring it in. Get it right. Today's technology, there should be no one anywhere that would ever be executed that was, wrongfully found guilty. There's too much technology today. If guilty, execute. The system has to recognize the existing family members of the murdered ones. We're going through hell. We don't understand the legalities of most of this. I'm sorry it might take somebody 15 minutes to sit down in a conference room with me. But for God's sakes, take that 15 minutes here and there and explain to me, if you have to do it like I'm a 3-year-old, explain it to me so that I don't go home and not understand what I've just sat and watched and then don't hear from you for another year. We're complex people, the survivors. We are going through just so many different emotions. I can't even, name them all.
Well, that brings up that actually is a good point. How do you want people to treat you as a survivor?
As a survivor, mainly I want to be treated with just a certain degree of respect. I'm an adult. Please come and talk to me like one and tell me what has happened today. It doesn't matter that I sat there. Take that 15 minutes and keep me informed.
Why is that so important? To remain informed of what's going on?
You're going to find out sooner or later. I always found out later. I always found out through an article in the newspaper or from a reporter calling me. That's not how a person should find out. That's why I want to be informed. Of course, I can't say from the moment it happens, but from the first moment they have available, I believe it would be the surviving victims that should hear about it. But before the news people, before it goes down on a wire to them, call me. Pick up a phone and call me. I have been through hell and back. What you're going to say to me isn't going to break me. That's the biggest thing. That's a really big thing I should mention. Don't feed me what you think I want to hear. Mm-hmm. I know it makes it easier for you, and that it might be that little possibility of what you're saying, there might be a little ring of truth to it. Give me both sides. Let me hear what also could happen. If I ask you, give me some odds on this, go on and give them to me. Help me to prepare.
The respect and notice Mona asks for seem like common sense, but clearly the system has its flaws. Major emotional upheavals in cases like Barbel's that can cause a lifetime of pain for the family members left behind.
What's happening now in the case?
Oh gosh, now we're some years later. New laws have been enacted. The United States Supreme Court has ruled that now life without parole cannot be given to 16 and 17-year-olds unless they are the worst of the worst and they don't feel like that they can be rehabilitated in any way. So now we are going to court with the ringleader, who has filed motion that his sentence is illegal under the Supreme Court's ruling. The second one involved, although he has been before the parole board 3 times, he was given a serve-out. So he used the same defense and actually won and is going back before the parole board in a very short time. I've not got the date yet. So we are back in like the mainstream of it all.
So just so that I can kind of like even wrap my mind around this, he went from being sentenced to death to now having a chance to be out in the community on parole.
Yes.
Potentially, depending on this decision.
Yes.
Have you ever had the opportunity to speak to the court and give your side of this experience?
Never. The only time I've been allowed to speak was during David Buchanan's parole hearing. The first time he went before, we weren't notified. But the second and third, I was at. And the third was we had a well planned out, I always went alone. And I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. So my sister and my sister's daughter, Stephanie, went with me. I said, please walk in there and speak from your heart. I was very aggressive with my family at that moment because I didn't know what else to do. I said, Sharon, tell them what has happened to you. Tell them how many times you've been in a mental hospital. This is nothing to be ashamed of. Tell them you can't sleep at night. I said, Stephanie, I love you, but you have to tell them how much you wish you'd had your real mother. You're not going to hurt me by saying those things. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. We went in there and we cried and we pled and we begged. And I'm not ashamed to say that because I'll be doing it again. I hate it. I hate having to beg. But I will beg. I'm not above it. And if it will keep them in there, I will do so. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make me feel real good because I feel like they were sentenced. Why do I have to keep begging and pleading? I'm telling them what happened to my sister over and over and over when it rips my heart out every time.
Given the amount of pain Mona and her family have dealt with, I asked if she had a specific message for anyone.
I would tell the killers of Barbel, I haven't given up in almost 38 years. I won't stop now. I will never stop. I know I've said it and it sounds cliche, but until she can walk through that door, they're not walking out of that prison. If I have any fight left in me, the fight goes on.
As my time with Mona drew to a close, I asked her one final question.
What has kept you going through all of these years?
Oh, it's a hard one. I guess just I made a promise to my sister, but it really happened on my father's deathbed. I told him I would never back down. And I told him I would do that for him, and I've kept that promise.
That brings us to the end of episode 1. I'd like to thank Mona for sharing her story. If you or your family member has been the victim of a crime and you'd like your story featured on the show, please find the submission form on our website at crimevictimsspeak.wixsite.com. If you'd like to contact me, there's a page and discussion group on Facebook. And if you enjoyed the show, subscribe now and leave a 5-star review wherever you find your podcasts. I posed one final question to Mona.